This recent discovery has baffled me the most. In the past, Earth had rings around it. Rings that slowly disintegrated, falling back to Earth in the form of a sustained meteor shower, and which contributed, by greatly obscuring the sun, to initiate a colossal glaciation that struck our planet at the time when they were put in place. And what allows us to affirm that these landscapes, which are among the most surreal that Earth has ever borne, most likely existed 467 million years ago. It's a crazy scientific publication from last year that surprisingly didn't get much attention. It's truly fascinating. In two maps, you should look at our world differently. Researchers have studied in detail the traces left by meteorites that struck the Earth during a period of the Ordovician, marked by particularly intense bombardment. And what you see displayed on the screen is the distribution of impact craters on the surface of the continents. Today, each of these points corresponds to an impact crater several kilometers wide, produced by the fall of meteorites that struck our planet between -467 and -450 million years. So far, the craters appear to be randomly distributed across the continent's surfaces, which is quite normal since the meteorites that occasionally hit us do not choose where they are going to fall and therefore scatter randomly on the surface of the Earth. This random distribution of impact craters is also very visible on the surface of the Moon, which, devoid of atmosphere, erosion, and tectonic plate movements, has not erased the traces and is almost uniformly covered with them. Except during the Ordovician, which is where it gets weird. The continents on Earth obviously did not have the same arrangement as they do today. You are currently seeing a reverse reconstruction of the great puzzle of continents scrolling on the screen, which will lead us to their arrangement 470 million years ago. And where it becomes totally confusing is that if we reposition these 21 impact craters at the exact places where they formed at the time, we get this. Absolutely, all the known craters that formed on the surface over a period of nearly 20 million years are located near the equator, while only 30% of the planet's land surface is found at these latitudes. And they all even seem almost perfectly aligned. And there, I think you see the problem. How to explain that meteorites, which are supposed to come from all directions and whose fall has spread over nearly 20 million years, have come to hit the Earth, almost constantly in the same place? It makes no sense. In fact, we can examine this question from all angles. This anomaly is almost impossible to explain unless we consider that the Earth has rings. I'll let you ponder for 2 minutes on the why and how while I say a few words. From the 100,000 stars of the Hercules globular cluster, towards which we sent the Arecibo message, the first radio transmission intended for potential extraterrestrial civilizations. This cluster is situated 25,000 light-years from Earth, captured by this telescope. Researchers have had fun calculating that the chances for such an alignment of impact craters to stretch over time, sometimes several million years, is the result of chance is nearly 1 in 25 million. In terms of magnitude, it's about as likely as winning the Euro million. The only hypothesis that can explain this strange arrangement of craters is that our planet once had a gigantic ring system that remained in place for several million years. And it would have slowly disintegrated and rid itself of these elements, some of which would have crashed onto the continents along a specific path. An orbital re-entry corridor centered on the equator, precisely where the rings formed. And although at the time all the regions of the globe near the equator were abundantly showered by the regular fall of meteorites from the rings, only the craters that formed on the surface of the continents would have reached us. Because impact traces from meteorites that fell into oceans were not preserved. Completely erased by time and the rapid renewal of oceanic plates, they have been lost forever. Now that we've laid the groundwork, I suggest we delve deeper into the extremely convincing arguments put forward by the researchers. And if I don't do too badly, afterwards you should look at the sky of our planet differently. The hypothesis, approximately 467 million years ago. That is, from the moment when the rates of bombardment of the surface skyrocket. A huge asteroid, estimated to be about 15 kilometers in diameter and which grazed our planet, would have been torn apart by gravitational forces. Reduced to thousands of smaller pieces, the remains of this huge block would then have rearranged themselves in space, spinning around the Earth. And gradually, the larger elements would have ended up, through constant collision, fragmenting, giving birth to a vast ring system composed of a chaotic mix of blocks, rocks, dust, and ice, perpetually in motion, and whose most imposing elements would have gradually fallen back to Earth. The fact that the impact craters dating from this era were all formed near the equator already gives a lot of credit to this theory. Because when a thin stream of matter forms rings around a planet, they inevitably end up, regardless of their original region of formation, migrating and stabilizing at the equator, where there is a slight bulge, a slight equatorial swelling caused by the rotation of the star, and which, over time, forces the matter to concentrate and align at this level. That's why all known ring systems are located at the equator of their planet. Beyond the crater's strange arrangement, researchers also discovered that the layers of limestone sedimentary rocks that formed at the same time as the supposed establishment of the rings contain large amounts of micro-meteorite debris. And these levels of enrichment, abnormally high and gradually decreasing over time, are observed in all sedimentary rocks, having been deposited at the time in regions located near the equator, as if they had been continuously sprinkled with a nearly continuous fine rain of dust from the ring. However, we know that such structures are unstable. They degrade and crumble by themselves over time. Thus, once in place, the rings would have very slowly declined and lost their splendor. Gradually drained by the planet, they would have emptied out very slowly. Slowed down by the Earth's tidal forces, the debris making them up would have ended up grazing the upper atmosphere, which, through friction, would have slowed them down until they plunged towards the surface, by causing an unusually intense bombardment and declining over time as the rings emptied, and after about 20 million years of continuous orbital disintegration, the rings had almost completely disappeared. 20 million years generated a splendid sky traversed by a huge pale and slightly milky ribbon, stretching from one horizon to the other, and transforming by its mere presence the night skies into a small white night. Because even if these rings were probably less bright than those of Saturn, insofar as the proximity of the Earth to the Sun must have quickly sublimated the highly reflective water ice that was there. At the beginning, it must have still shone with 1,000 lights. To convince yourself, consider that the Moon, whose surface is a dull gray, still reflects enough light for us to see details distinctly on nights when it is full. And this, even though it occupies less than 0.5% of the part of the sky that you can take in at a glance. Now try to imagine the amount of light it can reflect. A structure whose gigantic dimensions cause it to visually obstruct nearly a quarter of the night sky at certain latitudes. And there, you can start to get a small idea of their effect. The rings must have been so dazzling that they completely eclipsed a very large part of the stars in the firmament. And what if you could walk on the surface of the emerged lands of the Ordovician to contemplate these delirious and spectacular landscapes of shadow and light games? You could have seen in the sky the apparent shape of these rings radically changed depending on the latitude at which you would have landed to contemplate them. Thus, from the equator, the rings seen from the edge would have been for you nothing more than a thin line crossing the sky from one end to the other. While observing them from the tropics, you would have seen them fill a considerable portion of the sky at these latitudes when the planet turns its back to the sun, and as night falls, the rings are so high in the sky that they continue to catch the sunlight and shine intensely, illuminating a large part of the planet from above, like a huge halogen with a design of striped, slightly milky discs would do, depending on the seasons and times of the day. These ring systems could even be visually split in two when the shadow of the Earth plunged them into the black night of space. Finally, at the poles, depending on the time of day and the year, could you have seen them partially hidden by the horizon? Note that probably no creature living on Earth has ever seen these rings, as animal life was then exclusively underwater, and only a few plants devoid of a root system, had begun to colonize the continents when they were formed. But beyond the purely aesthetic aspect and the undeniable candy for the imagination, which is already very cool in itself, the most interesting may not be there. Because the fact that our planet may have had rings could well have contributed to triggering one of the greatest global coolings that the Earth has ever known. Because by reflecting a significant fraction of the sunlight, the thin films of rock and dust drifting in space, and which partially veiled the sun, projected to the ground of certain regions of the world. A gigantic shadow plunging in broad daylight depends entirely on the planet, in a cold, unreal glow, deprived of a large part of the sun's rays that struggle to diffuse through the rings. These regions plunged into shadow then saw their temperature drop drastically. By way of comparison, consider that a total eclipse of the sun, which lasts only a few minutes, can lower the average air temperature of the region it obscures by 3 to 5 degrees. Thus, even though they only obstruct a small part of the sunlight, these gigantic rings, which depending on the time of year, could remain for hours, days, or even weeks, obscuring the same region of the globe, cast their shadow locally, killing summers and triggering winters. On a planetary scale and in the long term, these continuous eclipses of the sun ended up having a similar impact to that of large-scale volcanic eruptions. Every day as the sun rose in the sky, the rings did the same, continually reshaping the planet's climatic balances more deeply, leading to a colossal global cooling. Quickly, immense polar ice caps form and expand without anything stopping them. And these ice caps, in turn reflecting more and more solar rays, will trigger a vicious circle with colossal repercussions. These are the theoretical effects that the presence of a ring around the Earth would have. And where it gets disturbing is that the establishment of this belt of rock in space coincides with the start of one of the most impressive ice ages our world has known, and which culminated during the Hernansian glaciation. A troubled and frozen period in the history of our planet, during which a gigantic ice cap covered almost all of the planet's emerged lands, and which saw global average temperatures drop by nearly 8 degrees in a few thousand years. Combined with episodes of intense volcanism, this glaciation played a major role in the second most significant mass extinction that life on our planet has undergone. The Ordovician-Silurian extinction, during which 85% of species disappeared, with the collapse of temperatures and the retreat of the seas over several hundred kilometers. However, the event that triggered this sudden cooling remained a mystery until now. A mystery that could be solved by the existence of rings, which, acting like gigantic parasols deployed for nearly 20 million years, would have contributed to triggering a phase of general cooling with their ominous shadow, which then spiraled out of control. Surprisingly, beyond the glaciation phase, which aligns well with the estimated duration of the ring's presence. The supposed period of their disappearance strangely coincides with a sudden planetary warming. Indeed, it is observed that this was 444 to 437 million years ago, a warming as brutal as it was sudden, during which the average global temperature rose by about 6 degrees. And this event begins precisely at the moment when the rings had just dissipated, as if their disappearance had marked the return of the sun. In the end, between the first widespread deposits of fine micro-meteorites less than 467 million years ago and the sudden temperature rise, researchers estimate that the ring system would have remained in place for 22 million years. 22 million years of an imposing presence that left its mark on the Earth's climate and the soil of the continents. Once the rings have dissipated, all that will remain of this event are traces of impact scattered across the globe by the movement of tectonic plates that have taken care of dispatching the evidence, like mixing the pieces of a giant puzzle. Definitely, I would give a lot to be able to travel back in time to that period and contemplate these surreal landscapes. And after spending just a few hours shivering from the cold and maybe even narrowly missing getting hit by a meteorite, return to the present, quite happy to live here and now on the surface of a planet without rings. Here, You have a playlist that takes you on a journey to discover other forgotten landscapes of our planet. I don't know what you will find over there,